Asians still talking about affirmative action as they suspect that it will backfire. So according to these videos that I'm about to share with you guys, not every Asian was for striking down affirmative action. Some are even saying that they need to fight for it back in capital letters. So let's get into the videos.
Hey TikTok, Kai Von Schroff here. I'm an alumnus of Brown, Harvard, and Yale, and an Asian American. Let's talk about the disgraceful opinion out of the Supreme Court. Make no mistake, the Supreme Court has just ripped away a tool that we had to address the systemic inequalities that this country has been built upon. Inequalities that undeniably persist today. The narrative around affirmative action admissions is completely false. One quick example. Just last year in May, I graduated from my joint degree program at Harvard Law School and the Kennedy School of Government. It's a 4-year program, 12 students in that program, not one black student. In the year 2022, if you look at the faculty level, this trend also persists. The Harvard Kennedy School has just two tenured faculty members that identify as African American. What kind of environment do you think that is for students of color? Meanwhile, a 2019 study of white admits at Harvard showed that 43% of those admits were either legacies, athletes, or related to donors or staff of Harvard. Yet somehow the Supreme Court doesn't seem to care about that being unfair. Maybe that's because despite lying about having no connections to Yale, Brett Kavanaugh got in because he was a legacy. Or maybe that's because Amy Coney Barrett, the least qualified justice on the court, doesn't want to answer questions about how she got there when Trump said he picked her because she's a woman. The irony is affirmative action is actually not about selecting unqualified applicants just because they are diverse. It's about selecting qualified applicants and giving priority to underrepresented groups. And let's be honest about the sick, twisted tactic that went into effect here, which was pitting Asian Americans against other minorities. It's a divide and conquer approach, and unfortunately, too many Asian Americans have fallen for this. So I want to call you out. We need to do better. But this is a wake-up call, not a death sentence. We must fight back and demand equal opportunity for all students. We deserve a system that sees us, hears us, and believes in us. Share this, make it viral. Let's send a message loud and clear that we won't stand for inequality. We won't go backwards, no matter what the Supreme Court says.
To approach this topic, I was really struggling because I realized for people to realize how harmful getting rid of affirmative action is, they have to have a heart and morals. Because the reality is that you can find hundreds and thousands of statistics online where you can clearly see that the median GPA or test scores of Black and Hispanic students who are admitted into elite universities are lower than their Asian or white counterparts. But if you actually manage to overcome confirmation bias and conduct more research with an unbiased perspective, you would be able to see in the racial breakdown of students attending that same university, there are significantly less Black and Hispanic students at those same elite universities. When I've talked to a lot of my peers that are Asian American about their opinions on affirmative action, they think it's a good thing that we're getting rid of it. And I don't necessarily blame them because I used to think that way as well. I thought it was unfair that I could get higher test scores than someone else, but just because I'm Asian, my chances of getting in were significantly lower than their chances. I grew up in a pretty affluent town that was predominantly white. My school system was known for having a pretty good education system. In my school of roughly about 1,300 students, there were maybe at max 10 Black students in my entire school. Contrastingly, when I was a junior in high school, I was placed into foster care, so I had to move to a school that was pretty socioeconomically disadvantaged, and a majority of my peers were Hispanic or African American. I was the minority as an East Asian. There were other Asian people, like there were some Filipino people, Vietnamese people, but the bottom line was that my new school, although it was a little bit more diverse, I was enrolled in 7 APs at my old high school during my junior year. And because my new public high school was so underfunded, they didn't have 4 of my 7 APs. At my old school, where they gave out Chromebooks like it was nothing, at my new school, they probably had at max like 2 computer carts. And if you needed to use a computer, your only option was pretty much going to the library. And while roughly about 20 to 30 students from my old school would get accepted into UCLA, maybe roughly about 1 to 3 students every single year would get admitted into UCLA from my new school. And why was that? It was simply because people from my old school had a lot more money. Almost every single one of my peers had SAT prep tutoring or college counselors. They could afford private tutors for whatever classes that they were struggling in. And they also had parents that had gone to college, parents that could help them with their college applications and knew what colleges were looking for. When I was applying to college, I had to do all the research myself. There were almost 0 resources at my new school versus at my old school, we had a designated college counselor. The average white family today holds over $170,000 in net assets, compared to just $17,000 for the average Black family in America. If you're arguing that Black students or Hispanic students are stealing your spot at an elite university, try putting yourself in their shoes for once and thinking about how much harder they had to work on their own to achieve only half of what was handed to you. If you're one of those people that believe, oh, well, they should just work a little bit harder, countless studies have proven the prevalence of racial bias within our society. It is found within our education system. It is found when people are applying for jobs. Teachers, recruiters hold this implicit bias that Black students are not as capable as their white counterparts. White people and Asian people in America, on average, live in more affluent neighborhoods and are wealthier than their Black or Hispanic counterparts. If you do not support affirmative action because you think it's unfair, because students are stealing opportunities away from well-deserving students, you should probably be directing your anger towards athletes, legacies, donors, or children and faculty. One statistic I found online was that over 75% of white ALDCs would have been rejected if they weren't an ALDC. People love to use success stories in America as their martyrs of, see, if you just work hard enough, you can make it too. But how can anyone become a success story if they're not given a chance? Each and every single student, regardless of their race or ethnicity, that gets admitted into any university deserves to be there. And I know how it was like applying to college. I remember thinking that college, whatever college I get into, is the end all be all. But that's not the reality. I know plenty of students that have gone to community college or less prestigious state schools that are extremely successful. But if other minorities have to work 10 times harder than us to even get a chance to be able to achieve the American dream, why shouldn't they be given the chance to be able to? Because there's this idea that it's easier for Black students or Hispanic students to get into college, who do you think job recruiters are going to think are more deserving of a certain role if they're comparing a Black student and a white student from the same university? But a Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Princeton, Yale education, hardly anyone can argue with that. Instead of trying to determine what is fair or which student deserves to be in a certain university, try to view it in a more holistic sense. Don't just use GPA or test scores as a means to be able to determine what is fair or who is deserving. View it from a more holistic sense and think about what privileges that you've been extended and what privileges your other peers have been extended. Me as a foster youth, me as someone that is a first-generation student, I view college as a means for survival, as a way for me to create generational wealth, because I don't have the support of my parents. While for others, college is just another prestige point that their parents can parade around. Or not getting into college doesn't mean that you'll be homeless or without the support of your parents.
First of all, no racial group is a monolith. There are Asians who study hard, there are Asians who don't. There are Black people who study hard, and there are Black people who don't. And second of all, can we take a step back and recognize how ridiculous it is to compare racial groups in a country that have completely different backgrounds and histories? But in the US, among high selectivity immigrants, African immigrants actually have a higher education level than East Asian immigrants, and in particular Nigerian immigrants have a higher education level than Chinese and South Korean immigrants. So it has nothing to do with Asian or Black. But do you know why we started comparing Asians and Black people in the United States? It's because in the 1950s and 60s, when the United States was engaging in military actions in Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, bringing democracy to Asia and fighting against communism, as the civil rights movement gained in momentum and attention, people around the world started wondering, with all of the racism and injustice in the United States, who are Americans to go to any other country and tell them how to be? So the United States said, no, Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans are being great. You can look, they're not protesting. They're quiet, they're working hard, they're living their lives, and they're doing fine. The problem is the loud, angry, protesting Black people. And do you notice how the model minority myth only ever goes in one direction to make Black people look bad? Because let's take the model Asian who studies really hard. Do you know who else they're studying much harder than? White people. In 2021, among 18 to 24-year-olds, college enrollment among Asian Americans was 60%, among white people it was 38%, and among Black people it was 37%. So among white and Black people it was about the same. But struggling white people do not get told you would be doing better if you were more like Asian Americans with their strong family values and their emphasis on academics. As a matter of fact, when Asians get compared to white people, Asian success is an indication that Asians are stealing opportunities and resources from white people and that we don't belong here.
Okay, and just to add on that, I think there's a big misconception of how affirmative action works. I think people have this misunderstanding that there's a race quota that colleges use to have like a certain amount of black people, a certain amount of Asian people, a certain amount of Hispanic people. Well, according to Google, that does not exist. There is no race quota in colleges in the United States of America. The whole point of affirmative action was to, promote equal opportunity and address the historical disadvantages certain groups faced, and that could be, based on race, ethnicity, and gender. So how did affirmative action work when applying to colleges? I was about to say work. This is the part in the essay where you talk about your race, your gender, your ethnicity when applying to colleges, and they just take that into consideration. That's it. No quota. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, guys. If Google is wrong on that. Otherwise, please let me know what to think about this video in the comment section below, and I'll see you in my next video. Peace.